we're going to consider three more little stories concerning Elisha, the prophet Elisha, and the sons of the prophets, our old friends, the sons of the prophets. And you find this in the book of 2 Kings, and beginning with chapter 4, verse 38. Two of the stories are here in chapter 4, and then we'll be skipping tonight chapter 5, which is the story of Naaman, and we'll skip on over to chapter 6 so that we can entertain all of these episodes that have to do with the sons of the prophets. And these seem to be rather strange stories. As we read them now, they're rather strange and seem to almost have no point, some of them. But now let's read 2 Kings chapter 4, beginning with verse 38. And Elisha came again to Gilgal, and there was a dearth in the land, and the sons of the prophets were sitting before him. And he said unto his servant, Set on a great pot, and seethe pottage for the sons of the prophets. And one went out into the field to gather herbs, and found a wild vine, and gathered from it wild gourds his lap full, and came and spread them into the pot of pottage, for they knew them not. So they poured out for the men to eat. And it came to pass, as they were eating of the pottage, that they cried out and said, O thou man of God, there is death in the pot. And they could not eat thereof. But he said, Then bring meal. And he cast it into the pot, and he said, Pour out for the people, that they may eat. And there was no harm in the pot. And there came a man from Baal-Shalish, and brought the man of God bread of the first fruits, 20 loaves of barley, and full ears of corn in its husk. And he said, Give unto the people, that they may eat. And his servant said, What should I set this before 100 men? He said again, Give the people, that they may eat. For thus saith the Lord, They shall eat. And then he says there will be plenty left over after they eat. So he set it before them, and they did eat, and left some thereof, according to the word of the Lord. Then in chapter 6, verse 1, And the sons of the prophets said unto Elisha, Behold now, the place where we dwell with thee is too strait for us. Let us go, we pray thee, unto the Jordan, and take thence every man a beam, and let us make a place there where we may dwell. And he answered, Go. And one said, Be content, I pray thee, and go with thy servant. And he answered, I'll go. So he went with them, and when they came to the Jordan, they cut down wood. And as one was felling a beam, the axe head fell into the water, and he cried and said, Alas, master, for it was borrowed. And the man of God said, Where fell it? And he showed him the place, and he cut down a stick, and cast it in thence, and the iron did swim. Therefore, said he, Take it up to thee, and he put out his hand, and took it. Now we'll notice again that each of these stories involves a group of people called the sons of the prophets. A prophet is a man who speaks unto men for God. That's the definition of a prophet as given in 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 3. And the sons of the prophet would connote those that have the legacy, or they have the privilege. Now, whether they do or not is another matter. But they are left a legacy of speaking for God. We've come across these quite frequently before in our story of the ministry of Elisha. You remember that there were 50 sons of the prophets at Jericho, and there were apparently 50 sons of the prophets at Bethel. And those at Jericho representing God's spokesmen, or people who hold themselves out to be God's spokesmen, who settle down in this world or make their home in this world. And you recall that they had no power to give life. For there in Jericho, although it was a good place to live, the water was bad and the land was barren. And there was nothing that the sons of the prophets could do about it. And so when Elisha, who, as we've said before, represents the ministry of the risen Christ through those who are his at this age, when he put a salt in the water, then the water became good and the land ground was healed, showing that if Christ is put into the world, that he will fix up whatever's wrong. Now, this happens individually to those who are called out of the world when they're saved, and it will happen to the world as system, or the world as such, when Christ comes back to reign after the world, of course, goes into the terrible putrefaction that we call the Great Tribulation. And so Christ was the salt that was put into the barren waters at Jericho. But there was no ministry at Bethel, if you'll remember. For Bethel represents that which once was founded upon the name of Christ and the recognition of God, but that which had apostatized. The word apostasy means to depart from or fall away. And apostasy, when it's spoken of from a theological standpoint, means to fall away from the faith or to depart from the true faith. And we found that those at Bethel had departed from the true faith and were worshiping idols. They had gone into apostasy. Well, you see no remedy at Bethel, because there is no remedy for apostasy but judgment. Now, this is a pitiful thing because it's so pitiful sometimes to see God's people trying to bring spiritual life back into an organization that has apostatized, and that's never been done in the history of the world. There's never been such a thing as a religious organization that has apostatized all the way and then been brought back to spirituality. Now, how do Christian organizations apostatize? Well, there's a pattern. They let so many of the enemy in the camp till the enemy takes over the camp. We're in a spiritual warfare. And the problem is that through a desire to grow and be big, they let down the bars and they say, well, let them in, whoever they are, and maybe we'll be able to win everybody. But it never happens. It never has happened. It never will happen. Whatever the organization, whether it happens to be like the early church when Constantine in 300 and something A.D. brought the whole Roman Empire into Christianity, then unsaved people outnumbered saved people. And the church apostatized. Now, there were individual Christians, always have been. God does never leave himself without a remnant of spiritual believers. But you see this in the great Reformation churches. For instance, you see it in, well, let's name some of them, such as the Lutheran Church that was formed right after the Reformation and became the state church in many places. And I'm sure there are spiritual people who call themselves Lutheran. But wherever the Lutheran Church became the state church, they let too many of the enemy in the camp. And the organization apostatized. And wherever you see that happen, the church is a dead church. You go into any country in Europe, such as the Scandinavian countries, where Lutheranism became the state religion, and you see a totally dead church. And you find this true with the Church of England, or what have you. And you're finding it rapidly happening to the large denominations in this country, and even to many of the smaller ones. Now, usually the difference is, the smaller the organization, the longer it takes to apostatize. But the faster it grows, the more rapidly apostasy comes. And so, whether you're talking about a religious institution like Harvard University or Yale University, Princeton University, these once were, or whether you take an organization like YMCA, or whether you take an organization like some that we have now, such as Youth for Christ and such as Word of Life and Christian Business Men's Committee, they're currently, predominantly, still composed of born-again people. But never you mind, if the Lord tarries, they will apostatize. This is the way of all organizations. They apostatize. And when they go into apostasy, there is no remedy except judgment, no bringing back to life. And so some of these sons of the prophets had settled down in Bethel. That is to say, that place which was once known as the house of God, where God was recognized by Jacob. It became the place of idolatrous worship, and the place where the situation was, as we find later in 2 Kings, that the people were taught to worship their own gods as they pleased, and also to fear the true God. In other words, they had a terrible mixture of Christianity plus, and this is worse than no Christianity at all. To have Christ plus something else is zero. There's no such thing as Christ plus without taking from. Anytime you try to add something to Christ, you subtract. It'll always work this way. And this is what apostasy does. It tries to add. It adds works, organization, tradition, adds all this to Christ. And every time something's added to Christ, then something is really subtracted from Christ, because He is all in all. And when you add something to, you're taking something away. So you don't see any remedy come at Bethel. You saw only judgment there. You read the story again of the prophets at Bethel, you find that the story brings only judgment. But here we have the sons of the prophets at Gilgal. And Gilgal certainly is the right place to start, isn't it? Remember, we found that Gilgal is the place where the children of Israel established their base of operation, or their camp, just outside the walls of Jericho, before Jericho was defeated or taken. Jericho representing the world. And if we want to, or it represents really doing God's work in relationship to the world. And if we want to do God's work in this world, we always need to start at the camp at Bethel. And you'll remember the 5 things that happened at Gilgal. You remember the 5 things that happened at Gilgal. Number 1, the 12 memorial stones from out of Jordan were set up there. This is life after death. This to come to Gilgal and look upon those stones is to go forth in the power of the resurrected Christ. And then we found the next thing that happened there is that the children of Israel were circumcised. Rather than preparing for battle, they were disabled for battle. Well, this stands for putting no confidence in the flesh, but yielding entirely to Jesus Christ. This is what circumcision stands for in the New Testament. If you're circumcised in heart, then you count your flesh as nothing, and you yield your all to Christ. You do this at Bethel. And then we find that they ate the Passover at Bethel. And of course, the feast on the Passover is to realize in every effort that the only power unto salvation and the only power unto service comes by way of faith in the blood of the slain lamb. And this we find again at Gilgal. Then the next thing that happened at Gilgal was that the children of Israel began eating the old corn of the land. And to feast upon the corn of the land is to glory in or have your sustenance in that which Jesus Christ does in and through, the risen Christ does in and through the Christian, rather than glorying in, or is an advancement on, glorying in that which he did historically for us. That is, in his life, death, and resurrection. Jesus Christ did something for me when he lived, died, and rose from the dead. But he wants to do something in me and through me today as he lives. So I eat the old corn of the land at Gilgal. And then number 5, we find that Gilgal is where the children of Israel met the captain of the Lord of hosts. They found that the battle is the Lord's, and that he has the campaign all planned, and he graciously invites us to join in with the battle that he knows will be won, but he wants to involve us. So he's given unto us the ministry of reconciliation. So here we find Elisha at Gilgal, the right starting place. And we find that he had gathered some of these sons of the prophets together at the right place to listen to the word of the Lord. And they were sitting before him. And we have time to eat. He wants to feed them something. Notice, he's going to feed them on 2 different occasions. He's going to feed them from the pot, and then he's going to feed them bread. Well, feeding them from the pot would work fine, except somebody went out and got a poisonous vine and mixed it in with the good food. And they would have all died. But here is when Elisha put something in the pot. He put meal into the pot. And then later on, we'll find him feeding with bread, feeding with the corn of the land, the first fruit. And in our story in chapter 6, the problem was solved by putting a stick into the water. Now, how do we open up these stories so that we can understand them? Well, we found this out before. We always put Jesus Christ right into the middle of it. Whatever performed the remedy is Christ. So, in this first story, the meal would have to be Christ. And in the second story, the bread would have to be Christ. And in the third story, the stick would have to be Christ in some aspect, just like the salt was Christ when the waters were healed at Jericho. Now, if we want to apply these stories to our own self, we put ourselves right in beside Christ. Or we involve ourselves with the ministry. And since this is the ministry of the risen Christ through his own, well, you might say there's a sense in which we're the Elisha here. Of course, it's actually Christ doing the work, the risen Christ doing the work. So you have Christ in his servant doing the work, and you also have the agent which brought about the healing. So in this first story, we find that the poison vine, the poison fruit, is false doctrine. It's Satan bringing that into the pottage, which would kill the prophets spiritually and make their ministry of none effect. We have a counterpart in the New Testament. It's try the Spirit to see whether they be of God. This is in 1 John chapter 4, 1 through 3. Every spirit that confesses that Jesus has come in the flesh is of God, and every spirit that confesses not that Jesus has come in the flesh is not of God. Of course, the same thing is brought over into the little book of 2 John, verses 7 through 9, where we're told many deceivers are gone out into the world which confess not that Christ has come in the flesh. This is a deceiver and an antichrist. Look to yourself that we lose not those things which we have wrought. And if any come unto you, bringing not this doctrine, he's an antichrist. He's against Christ. Well, what is the doctrine of Christ? The doctrine of Christ is the teaching that God became a human being in the person of Jesus Christ. He became flesh. He became one of us in the person of Jesus. This is the doctrine of Christ. So what was happening here at Gilgal, somebody was bringing in some poison, and the spirits needed to be tried. And someone tried the spirit, and there was no solution except to put meal into the pottage. Well, meal in the Bible, when used figuratively, means the life of Christ, or all of his character. We find this in the meal offerings. If you want an explanation of this, read in Leviticus chapter 2, the whole chapter 2 of Leviticus concerns itself with the meal offering. And then the law of the meal offering is in Leviticus chapter 6, beginning with verse 14. And if you read, for instance, it was baked with oil, This is Christ born of the Spirit, and it was anointed with oil. This is Christ anointed by the Spirit. And the whole of the meal offering speaks of Christ and all of his glory. I think one thing we haven't done in this series of Bible studies in Groveland, we've never gone back in the early chapters of Leviticus and studied all of the offerings, have we? Well, every one of them is Christ in one aspect or another. And the meal offering is Christ as he lived a perfect Christian life with all of his lovely character, all of his graciousness. This is the meal, the evenness. How do we know this? Well, it's explained to us, for instance, in one place in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, where he says, keep not the feast with the leaven of malice and hatred, but keep the feast with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. So it means that aspect of the life of Christ as he showed forth always, sincerity and truth. This is putting truth, the truth of Christ himself. See, Christ is truth exemplified. He could say, I am the truth. I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life. And to put meal into the pottage is to put the truth of Christ. And notice what happens when you do that. The very last line in verse 41, and there was no harm in the pot. I don't care how much poison is put in the pot. If Christ is put in the pot, it'll counteract all of the poison, and the pottage will be all right to eat. Now, isn't it strange here that in Gilgal, such a thing could happen? At Gilgal, this happened, that the wrong thing was put in the pot. Well, this shouldn't surprise us, because we should have already been on guard that such a thing could happen in Gilgal if we didn't try the Spirit. Because there's a story back in Joshua. Remember, we said that every successful campaign of Joshua began at Gilgal. And remember, Samuel said to Saul, if we're going to renew the kingdom, we must renew it at Gilgal. We must start from Gilgal. Gilgal is where the flesh is destroyed, and we walk in the Spirit. But there's a story in the 9th and 10th chapters of Joshua. We haven't gone into it, but it's the story of the Gibeonites. Now, the Gibeonites were part of the people of the land, which represents that is within us that would tend to keep us from occupying or enjoying the abundant Christian life. The 7 tribes inside the land represent such things as pride of life and fear of what people will say, and just fear in general, or faithlessness, or lack of faith, that is, or it could stand for envy, strife, all of those things which are part of our unregenerate self that will well up within us, because the old man is not eradicated. These things will well up within us, resentment, hatred, these things that will keep us from occupying the land and enjoying the Christian life. So the Gibeonites were of these. And they came in subtly, it says, with deceit. Now, you can go back and read this story, Joshua chapters 9 and 10. This happened at Gilgal. It tells you it happened there. They came to Joshua at Gilgal. And they came subtly. They fooled Joshua into thinking that they were on his side. They deceived him, in other words. The counterpart in the Bible is 2 Corinthians, is it chapter 11, where it speaks of Satan becoming an angel of light, and therefore we should not be surprised if his ministers come to us as angels of light. I believe this is 2 Corinthians chapter 11. Well, this is the New Testament counterpart of the Gibeonites coming. Maybe we ought to hold our place in 2 Kings and go back to that story, because there's one or two phrases that you need to consider that'll help you to understand that this can happen to you even at Gilgal. Joshua chapter 9. See, verse 3, and when the inhabitants of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done unto Jericho and to Ai, they did work wilily. Well, this has its counterpart in 2 Corinthians 11:3, where it says Satan comes subtly. And notice in the sixth verse, and they went to Joshua unto the camp at Gilgal. This happened at Gilgal. And said unto him, that is, they gave him a false story. And they said, let us join up with you. And Joshua said, all right. Where did Joshua make his mistake? Look at the 14th verse of the 9th chapter of Joshua. And the men took their fiddles and asked not counsel at the mouth of the Lord. And Joshua made peace with them and made a league with them. And boy, they caused nothing but trouble from then on. This happened at Gilgal. And what brought on the problem? Joshua asked not counsel at the mouth of the Lord. See? This is what happened. So you've got to be on your guard, even at Gilgal. And, because, see, Satan, he can come to Gilgal too. That's what he did in the person of the Gibeonites. So, at Gilgal, we try the Spirit to see if they be of God. How can we protect ourselves from the Gibeonites and from the poisoned pottage? Well, we protect ourselves from the Gibeonites, or that is the ministers of Satan that would come in subtly and operate through our fleshly propensities, such as envy and strife and so forth. We ask of the Lord. We take it before the Lord. And that's a simple solution. But see, even Joshua, remember when God told Joshua, if you're going to be successful in conquering this land, he said, Joshua, he said, I want to tell you something. He said, this book of the law shall not depart out of thy mouth, but thou shalt meditate therein day and night. He said, you need to do this so that you might learn, you might know all that is written therein. And he says, then you shall have good success. And then whatsoever you do shall prosper. Well, you see, Joshua stepped up there. He didn't go to the Lord. And so the Gibeonites got in. And the Gibeonites will get in wherever Gilgal is. Wherever you're gathered at Gilgal, if you don't take that simple precaution of coming before the Lord about every decision, every matter, He'll let you know. And try the Spirit. See, Joshua didn't try the Spirit, did he? To see if they be of God. Or it wouldn't have fouled up. But here, in Gilgal, when they came to the poison pottage, we're back in 2 Kings 4 again, they tried the Spirit and found that there was poison in the pot. And the solution was to place Christ in the poison pottage. And this is what we're to do. Wherever we see false doctrine creeping in, anything less than Christ is everything, we're to say, no. Jesus Christ is the truth. God became man. Jesus was God. God in the flesh. If you proclaim this, now I know this to be true. I know this to be true. I had an encounter in Orangeburg, South Carolina, with one of the hierarchies among the Jehovah's Witnesses. And I just kept saying, but Jesus is God. Jesus is God in the flesh. And pretty soon he was just absolutely enraged. Now he was the most calm, even, deliberate, rational man. And pretty soon he stormed out of the house in a rage. Satan absolutely cannot stand the simple, basic fact that you'll stand upon it. Jesus is God in the flesh. God became flesh in Jesus Christ. God gave his blood in the person of Christ on the cross for me. That's all I need. See, they add something to that. You need a lot more. Every false religion, every apostatization, I didn't say the word right, did I, of Christianity, is trying to mix something with Christ, which detracts from him. Now we notice, beginning with the 42nd verse, something else that happened while Elisha was instructing these prophets, sons of the prophets. We find that someone brought bread to them. And Gilgal's a good place to get. Notice they had the old corn of the land. It was the 42nd verse. He brought the man of God bread of the first fruit, 20 loaves of barley and 4 ears of corn in its husk. This was the corn of the land. He brought the right thing. No problem there. But somebody objected. That's not enough. You got to have something besides that. That'll never do the trick. That's what they said. You can't feed all these people. Said there were 100 of them there. Well, many times 100 is used figuratively. 10, when it's used figuratively, it means sufficient to show what God wants to portray. And 100, 20 means emphasizes. See, there were 20 loaves. It just puts double emphasis on it. And 100 just makes even a stronger emphasis. Figuratively, as far as I know, 20 means the same thing as 10 means with stronger emphasis. And 100 means the same thing as 10 means with even greater emphasis. So there were 20 loaves of bread, which God says is doubly sufficient, and there were everybody in the world. The need comes represented by the 20 loaves. So what happened? They took the 20 loaves and it didn't run out. There was plenty for everybody. And some left over. Sufficient. So, do. You got to mix some other things to supplement the diet some. The young people just will not go for that alone. No, you've at least got to have square dance in the church basement. That would be the minimum extra. And, or something like that. Entertainment. Because the risen Christ is not sufficient. He won't go around. But the true man of God says, you just give it to me, and let's see. And let's notice here, if Elisha represents that which the risen Christ is doing, notice, the man of God said, the last phrase in verse 42, and he said, give unto the people that they may eat. Now, it wasn't Elisha that gave unto the people. He told a servant. Now, we know this from the next line. And his servant said, what should I set this before 100 men? Now, notice this. Here's the same thing. The risen Christ says, it's enough. But many of his true servants say, no. And it's his operation, his program during this time to feed the bread to his people, the corn of the land, to feed it, not himself, but by the agency of his servant. You see that? And the servants are always thinking it won't be enough. And he says, feed them, there will be some left over. Do you know of a story in the New Testament that parallels this? We're going to go to that in just a moment, because this will put you right in the middle of it. But remember, we have another story, don't we, to consider here. And we're going to skip Naaman in the 5th chapter and go on over to the 6th chapter. And the sons of the prophet said unto Elisha, Behold now, the place where we dwell with thee is too strait for us, or too small, or we're too cramped here, is what they're saying. Well, you know, Gilgal is a little cramped. There are really not too many accommodations from an earthly standpoint at Gilgal. It's just a camp. It's just a temporary place. And the people that come to Gilgal even, you see, so many times they say, well, we need a little bit, we need to expand a little. We need to spread out the operation. And so the man of God says, well, he said, that's all right, but we may have to learn a lesson. They say, let us go, we pray thee, under the Jordan, this is the 2nd verse, and take thither every man a beam, and let us make a place there where we may dwell. And he answered, go. He said, look, we want to have a little more room. We want life to be a little easier. Remember, a Jordan represents this life as it sweeps you rapidly down into the Dead Sea, this life which ends in death, which the current of which inexorably carries you rapidly into the Dead Sea. That's what the Jordan represents. And here's a man that wants to dwell by Jordan. And this is a temptation for God's spokesman to make things a little more comfortable. And so he goes down there and says, well, and dwell. And they said, now, we want you to go with us, Elisha. We know that you're God's spokesman. And you've been giving us the straight word. We know you're the one that put the salt in the springs at Jericho so that life would come. And we know you're the one that put the meal in the poison pottage. And we know that you're the one that multiplied the bread. Well, we couldn't do it without you. Now, we want a little more comfortable place to live, but we want you to come along and be a part of it. And how much this is like God's people. We want the risen Christ to accommodate himself to our desires. Now, don't point your finger at somebody else, because all of us are sort of that way. We just have that propensity, don't we? We say, well, we need you, Jesus. Well, we couldn't do it without you. So you be sure and come with us now. Well, just like Elisha here, he is with us. Even if we might not be turning right down the right road. But you see, the risen Christ, if our heart's right, he will take every little side step and teach us with it. He's that gracious and that loving. He doesn't say, oh, you naughty so-and-so, I know what you've got in the back of your mind. You want to settle down and make life easy. He doesn't shake his finger at it. No, he's right with it. And he graciously goes along. But he's going to teach us a lesson. If our heart's right, that is. He'll teach us a lesson. He says in verse 3, I will go. 4th verse. So he went with them. And when they came to Jordan, they cut down wood. And as one was felling a beam, the axe head fell into the water, for he cried and said, Alas, master, for it was borrowed. Now, an axe head is made of iron, and if iron stands for the same thing here, it stands for strength. When iron is used figuratively in the Bible, elsewhere, for instance, in the prophetic scriptures in Daniel, it stands for strength. It's the strong metal, as opposed to the valuable metal. See, silver and gold are not strong metals. They're very malleable, and they'll bend. But iron is the strong metal. Iron's stronger. It's not as heavy as lead, but stronger, isn't it? You can do all kinds of things with lead and brass, copper, silver, what have you. With iron. Iron is strong, and it stands for strength. Now, the iron here was being used for the necessities, quote, of this life. But this man, this son of the prophet here, he might have not gone a side step. But tell you one thing, he had spiritual discernment, because he knew that he was operating with borrowed strength, especially when that strength was taken into the river Jordan. Because you see, any strength we have in this world, Christians, unsaved people too, but we're speaking here of saved people, their strength can be taken immediately by death, can't it? And this is what happened here. God showed to this young student, you might say, that his strength could be swept away in an instant, because every bit of strength that he has is borrowed. Christ says, without me you can do nothing. And yet Paul said, I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. So his strength was taken away. And he had absolute... Now, if death takes you away, what needed you of a better place to live? You're going to dwell by Jordan? You're going to have a more commodious type of appurtenance and so forth? Here? Well, death will take the need of that away immediately. And you'll have no strength or no need for strength. And so this servant here, he recognized that. And he says, well, he says, I was operating with borrowed strength. And every Christian needs to realize that constantly, that any strength he has is just given by God temporarily. It's lent to him. And the man of God said, where fell it? And he showed him the place, and he cut down a stick and cast it in there, and the iron did swim. The strength came back, didn't it? When the servant recognized that it was borrowed strength. What brought the strength back? The branch. The stick that was put in the water. The branch is one of the names of Christ. Now here's something very interesting. This word that's translated sticks, this exact same Hebrew word, is found in a similar story in Exodus chapter 15. So hold your place in 2 Kings and go back to Exodus chapter 15, and you're going to read a story that's very similar to this. And this is how you understand Scripture by explaining Scripture with Scripture. Exodus 15:22. This is just after they had come through the Red Sea, out of captivity in Egypt, the children of Israel had, and the first 21 verses of chapter 15 of Exodus is a song of deliverance. And then in verse 22, so Moses brought Israel from the Red Sea, and they went out into the wilderness of Shur, and they went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. And when they came to Marah, they could not drink of the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. Therefore the name of it was called Marah, and the people murmured against Moses, saying, what shall we drink? And he cried unto the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree. Now this word tree and the word stick are exactly the same word in the Hebrew original, which when he had cast into the waters were made sweet. There he made for them a statute and an ordinance, and there he tried them. Now what does this stand for? Putting the tree, or the stick, into the bitter waters. Well, Christianity in this world would be a bitter life. Water stands for life. And Christianity would be a bitter, bitter experience in the wilderness, the spiritual wilderness of this world, if Christ were not right in the middle of it. But when you put Christ, as represented on the cross, in the bitter waters, then they turn sweet. And you see, a tree is a very good figure of Christ in his humanity, as he ministered to us here on this earth. Because, see, a tree comes out of the ground, out of this earth. And then before it can be used, it must be cut off. This is why wood in the Bible stands for humanity. It comes up out of the earth, but it's only useful to God when you cut it off, when you count yourself as dead, or no more good. But because it's only when you take the wood out of its roots in the earth that it's any value to God. That's why it has to be a stick cut off. His life was cut off, and then it was he became useful in this world to God's program as he was willing to die, to be cut off from the earth, to be cut off. And so his roots would no longer be in the earth. And a branch or a tree or a twig is a typical name for Christ when we're explaining that he came out of the earth, in his humanity that is, but he was cut off from his attachment to the earth, from his being rooted in the earth. One place he's called a twig on the highest branch in Ezekiel. And isn't it in Isaiah, is it chapter 4? Just a minute, I'll find another place for you here. No, that's chapter 4, verse 2, but chapter 11. Isaiah 11, and there shall come forth a rod out of the stem of Jesse, and a branch shall grow up out of his roots. This is the prophecy of Christ, isn't it? Out of the roots, human roots, in this case, the human lineage of Jesse, the father of David. So it's a good type of Christ to show his humanity as it was cut off. And when this was placed in the river Jordan, the axe head did swim. And then he picked it up. Notice in this 2 Kings again, chapter 6, 7th verse. Therefore, said he, take it up to thee. And he put out his hand and took it. This young man used faith, you see. And then he had strength back, didn't he? Out of death, out of the place of death in the river Jordan came the strength that was needed. Now he would know that he's to use that axe head only for that which God would use. Now, if you put yourself right in the middle of this story and you let yourself be this young son of the prophet, you'll see that his mind was occupied with one thing, and that is, how can I be a little more comfortable in this world? And God didn't chide him because God looked at his heart, and he knew that he had a teachable heart. He knew that his heart was right, and he was just exercising some of his human propensities, and God was gracious. So God didn't chastise him, he taught him. And how wonderful this is. Much of what we do, that we think, right while we think we're in the middle of God's service. Now here he was, faithfully listening to the man of God. He was sitting before Elisha. the risen Christ. And he said, well, I think I could learn better if I had a little more comfortable place to live. So let's set aside this learning for a while and go sing in the let's put this, let's put aside this learning for a while and build us a better place to live. I got my two Bible classes mixed up. So the Lord didn't say, all right, you so-and-so, if that's what you put first, I'll fix you. No, he says, you little child, bless your little heart. Come along, and I'll teach you. I know your heart's right, and I'll teach you. Isn't he a gracious God? You know, he's done this for me so many times. He's gone right down to that River Jordan, gone right along with my idea. And then he turned around and taught me that he has a program. Aren't these stories in the Old Testament wonderful when you put Christ in the middle of them? This is all we need to do. Just put the Lord Jesus Christ right in the middle of them. And they just open up like a blossom, don't they? And you just couldn't, you just can't deny it when you put him there. See, he said all of the Old Testament scriptures is about himself, didn't he? Now, we're almost out of time. So very hurriedly, we're going to go to the counterpart of this story of multiplying the bread. We're going to go in the Matthew chapter 14. Now, this story, this happening in the earthly life of Christ, is recorded in all four Gospels. Of course, his death, the circumstances surrounding his death are described in all four Gospels, but not very many of the stories in the life of Christ are in all the four Gospels. But this one is, and you'll never understand the spiritual depth of the story unless you read it in all four Gospels, because each of the four places in some little detail. Now, the place where you've read this story is almost always in the Gospel of John, and I'll tell you why. It's the only one that has the little boy in it, and we like that, see. And so we always, if you have never heard in your life a Sunday school teacher tell the story of the feeding of the 5,000 and take it from Matthew or Mark or Luke, because the little boy is not there. You got to find him in John, and he gets to be the key figure. And the little boy gets glorified more than Christ, you know. Oh, isn't it wonderful how he took all of his treasures, and we talk about the little boy, and pretty soon we say, boy, somebody ought to have done something for that little fella. Dude. And, you know, some of them even go so far as to try to say this little boy became Mark, or this little boy became some other Bible figure or something like this, because they just can't stand to see this little boy drop. He's got to be glorified. Well, he's not in the Matthew account. Neither is he in the Mark account or the Luke account. So we're going to go to Matthew, and I'm sorry, but this is one time we're going to leave the little boy out. I know the time is now, but I have to tell you about that. I must have told you this before. But you know, I used to take these busloads of teenagers up to Word of Life Camp, upstate New York, every year. And we used to always stop at some real good fundamental Christian college or some good Christian organization on the way up. Like, for instance, we stopped many times at Philadelphia College of Bible or Washington Bible College or some of those schools like that. And then we toured the city there. And then the kids have got a chance to know, they're mostly high school kids, they've got a chance to know about that school. That's how come my daughter ended up at Philadelphia College of the Bible, because one time the bus trip spent the weekend there, and she was intrigued by the work there, so she ended up by being a student there. But anyway, this particular year, we wanted to tour Manhattan with the kids. And so we did our work through the Calvary Baptist Church, where Stephen Olford is. You know, they have a hotel there. The Salisbury Hotel is owned by the church. And so we made arrangements for them to put our kids up, and we made arrangements for Stephen Olford to bring them a devotional message that night. And so it so happened that Brother Olford hadn't realized it, but that was his wedding anniversary. So when we got there, there was an apology from him, and he had his assistant to bring the devotional message to the young people. Now, these were kids that were mostly 10th and 11th graders in high school. And so this man, he got up, he says, oh, we're going to have a wonderful Bible story tonight. And he said, I think maybe you've heard of it before. And he says, now this is the story of a lovely little Christian boy. And he began to tell the story. And he said, and then way back in the crowd, there was this little young fellow, maybe about the age of you children. And, of course, you know, by that time they had wiped him off the slate. But he waxed eloquent. Boy, did he get involved in this story. And they were saying, well, when is this character going to wind down? You know, here it turned them off. But he had this little boy tiptoeing through the crowd, and he looked at his little one chair that his mother had packed for him, and he looked around with compassion. Oh, boy, did he wax eloquent. And he had this story. That was our devotional for the night. I'm sorry if you... okay. Matthew 14, verse 15. And when it was evening, his disciples came to him, saying, this is a desert place, and the time is now past. Send the multitude away, that they may go into the villages and buy themselves food. Now notice, the disciples say to Christ, the people need to be fed. Send them where they can get food. You see, that's like we are from a spiritual standpoint. We say, I better get this guy to a Billy Graham crusade, or I better get this guy to that revival that church has every 6 months. I better get him somewhere where he can hear the gospel. I better get him over to that store where he can buy him some food. And because it's a desert place, and spiritually this is a desert place. And this verse, it says, the time is now past. In Mark, it says the day was far spent. Or in Luke, it says the place, it says we are here in a desert place. And truly, we are here in a desert place. And God's people need to be fed. And our answer is, send them away. Now, in another story similar to this in Mark about feeding the 4,000, Christ says, well, don't do that. They'll faint on the way. Mustn't do that. Mustn't send them away. The 16th verse, but Jesus said unto them, they need not depart. Give ye them to eat. No, don't send them away. You see, we have it fixed up. Send them somewhere. But they might not get the right food. Or they might faint or die before they get to the place where the food is. Or somebody with poison pottage might get a hold of them. They're hungry. They eat anything. So he said, no, he said, don't send the people away. You give them to eat. But look at the 17th verse. God's disciples, or the Lord's disciples says, they said to him, but we have here but 5 loaves and 2 fishes. In other words, they said, we don't have enough for them. Well, we don't have the wherewithal to feed these people. We haven't been to Bible school. Well, I never even went to a witnessing class. Me, I'm not ordained. I got to send them to somewhere where they can get the food. I'm not capable of feeding them. I'm saved. But that's just 5 loaves and 2 fishes. I don't have anything to feed them with. But what did Jesus say? But Jesus said, bring what you have to me. I don't care how little it is. You bring it to me. Same story we read back in 2 Kings, isn't it? 19th verse. And he commanded the multitude. Now watch me. I might read this wrong, so you watch me carefully. And he commanded the multitude to sit down on the grass, and he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes, and looking up to heaven, he blessed and broke and gave to the multitude. Huh? Oh, I see. And he gave the loaves to his disciples, and the disciples gave them to the multitude. And they did all eat and were filled, and took up of the fragments that remained 12 basketfuls. And 12 is a representative number. It means represents however much you want left over. And they that had eaten were about 5,000 men besides women and children. You see, his solution is different from ours. His solution is, I don't care how little it is. You bring it to me. I'll bless it. And when I give it back to you, it'll be enough. You need never worry. You know, that's really better than going to a witnessing class, isn't it? Let's relate that to our own everyday life. Let's suppose the person living next door to you is somebody in the Catholic hierarchy or a big wheel in some Protestant church that's filled with religion or what have you. Well, let's suppose that somebody is quite prominent in the neighborhood, and you say, well, that fellow really needs to get saved, but it'll take more than 5 loaves and 2 fishes for that fellow. And that's all I have. Well, you know, what's the answer? It's to take it to Christ. And there's where we fail. Take it to Christ first. And when he hands it back, now he may not hand that particular loaf back to you. He might hand that to some other disciple. He might say, well, this disciple over here would have the words that could reach this one. You see, there's 2 big advantages of bringing it to Christ, more than 2, certainly. Number 1 is, when he blesses it, it's enough. And when he gives it back to the right person, that they might give it to the one that's hungry. See, sometimes we go bargain in when what we all have done is spend our time in prayer, taking it to the Lord. You see, we're just back in the 9th chapter of Matthew. He explains this to us very carefully. Last part of the 9th chapter of Matthew, verse 36. And when he saw the multitude, he was moved with compassion on them, and because they fainted and were scattered abroad as sheep having no shepherd, then said he unto his disciples, the harvest truly is plenteous, but the laborers are few. Pray ye therefore the Lord of the harvest, that he will send forth laborers into the field. He didn't say go into the field. He says, pray ye the Lord of the harvest, that he will send forth laborers into the field, didn't he? Now, if they're all ready to harvest, and the laborers are so well needed, why don't we just tear on out into the field and start harvesting? There's not enough. We already had the answer. We don't have sufficient. It won't do the job. No, bring it to Christ. Bring it to him. And he'll see that there's enough. There's someone who's written a book called Soul Winning Made Easy. Well, I read the book one time, and I no doubt that the man that wrote it was a godly man concerned. But I came out with this thought. that soul winning made easy for the average Christian person is a matter of taking down the names of people on a list and saying, Lord Jesus, give me a burden for lost souls. Give me that same compassion that you had. Oh God, fill my own soul in such a way that it could be said, I looked upon the multitude and had compassion upon them. I'll tell you how you can tell whether you're doing it. Whether you can go up, if you're a Gator fan, go up to the Gator football game and look out on that mass of people watching the ball game, and if you can get so concerned by those people that you can't really care too much about who wins, then you know. So it costs something, see? You won't enjoy some things that you enjoyed before. They'll mean less because you'll have compassion for the lost souls. Or you don't have to go up to games, you'll just go out here to the local football field. And when you see that you really are more concerned about the lost souls that you see than whether or not your team wins, you're beginning to find out. And I didn't say you'd ever get to the point where you wouldn't care at all who won. I said when you really know down within the depths of your heart that you're more concerned about some lost souls there that you've been praying for particularly. So you see, put down the names, then ask the Lord for the same kind of compassion. You say, I could never have that kind of compassion. Paul says, you have the mind of Christ. You think like Christ, because he'll think through you when you're completely yielded, when you're really at Gilgal. And then you'll take it to him. When he gives the loaves and the fishes back, there'll be enough. There was enough with the 20 loaves in Elisha's day, and there'll be enough with the 5 loaves. It really doesn't make any difference how many loaves you start with if you bring it to Christ. Doesn't matter how many needs to be fed if you bring it to Christ. And let's pray. Lord, we pray again that our hearts would be exercised concerning these stories in your wonderful book. And we'd ask you to teach us how to put our Lord Jesus Christ right into the middle of every story, that it might be real to our own hearts. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.